Hey, Jason Seiden here. All right, part of my job requires creativity. Part of my life requires creativity. I've always been creative. It's important to me to think creatively about things. And I just went through a training in my company, leading through change. And part of it was, there's a time and a place for embracing open-ended, creative kinds of problem solving. And it's great training, not knocking it, but I realized I actually have a way of putting myself in a creative mindset. And I've developed this over the years because as I've gotten older and as the world has gotten noisier and beepier, I have found I have to be more and more intentional about getting myself into that place when I need to think creatively. So for me, the hook that I've always used is analogies, word games, writing. I like to write. That's how my brain flows. And so of all the different ways to get into a creative headspace, for me, what I do is I'll think of the challenge or I'll take anything. I mean, literally I could look out the window and a tree is but I'll start to play with analogies. And I'll think through maybe 3 or 4 analogies for a situation, and then I'll either take them a level deeper, or I will think of a different situation, or I'll just expand them until they get ridiculous. And that process, that little mental creative process, is enough, usually 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, to get me into a creative zone where I can do the actual work I need to do. It gets me into flow. Sometimes I'll do this out loud if no one's home. I used to do it with people all the time. I actually used to joke that the best gift somebody could give me would be a mannequin so I could just talk out loud and hear it, because sometimes that helps. And if I've got not saying I talk to them all the time, but I've been known to use them as stand-ins for other people. So anyway, here's what I get out of the analogies. Number one, they're humorous. They're often funny. Especially if you've got somebody you trust that you can do this with, or you let your own head go, where there's no filter, analogies get really funny really fast if you let them. So I don't put any constraints on where they go, and sometimes I'm amazed at where my mind takes me. Number two, they're clarifying. It's pretty easy to see something from a different perspective. You stitch 2 or 3 different analogies together for a situation, that's actually, that's clarifying. Makes it easier to describe to myself, makes it easier to explain to other people, makes it easier to check my thinking. And then as kind of a corollary to that, sometimes new solutions just sort of jump out at you when you think in terms of analogies. Things that are true in one area, but you just haven't applied that same lesson because you didn't see the connection from that area to this area. All of a sudden you do. So for instance, I've been working on community, and I've been looking at this, and I've been looking at talent acquisition, and we're going through all kinds of change. And so I keep thinking about, how do we predict what's coming? How do we get ahead of this? And I've written about how AI has some similarities to social media and all that. That's pretty close to the vest. I've been thinking about this really creatively. And so one of those conversations, I was sitting at dinner at RecFest, and I'm sitting next to a guy, I just met him. We're hitting it off. And I learned he's a FIFA ref. He is an assistant referee for international soccer tournaments when he's not running talent acquisition. And it got me thinking, this is how my brain goes. I'm like, okay, I've often thought about, sports analogies. Instantly, I'm assuming that recruiters and candidates, those are the 2 teams. And so I sparked a conversation. I asked about that. He said, no, actually, here's the analogy. And he turned it on me, and he put recruiters in the ref zone, and immediately I could see how what he learned as a ref could apply. And then sure enough, I poked into it, I started having this conversation. He's like, oh yeah, this has helped me build relationships with hiring managers, the whole thing. So Nick, phenomenal guy. So all of a sudden, this concept I have of hey, we got to bring in some new thinking and get ahead of this, boom, the solution presented itself to me, all because I'm playing with this analogy when given, instead of just saying, oh, you have this interesting hobby, I'm like, all right, how is your hobby like recruiting? Turns out there's an answer there. So, so I'm really excited. So please join us in 2 weeks on November 14th for that LinkedIn Live. It's going to be awesome. Nick's got some great content. And even if you're not in recruiting, if you ever have to work with people over whom you have limited, I don't want to say power, but limited influence, you're going to love what he has to share. And to the extent that you have creative work you have to do and you've got to embrace some of that open-ended thinking as a transition to that time when you're going to do that, think about playing with analogies and use that as a doorway into creative thinking. That's all I got. Love you. See you next week.